Good day, good people. You're listening to Lifting the Veil with your host, Carrie Lee. And today is the 5th of January, 2013. Happy 2013 to everybody out there. A year of new possibilities and more self-governance, taking control of who you are and what you are capable of. And today we're joined by Thomas Sheridan. And we haven't talked to him in some time. Thomas, it's so good to have you back on the show. How are you today?
Oh, hi, Carrie Lee. I'm delighted to be back on. It's great to talk to you again. And my best wishes for 2013 to you, your family, and all your listeners.
And the same to you. And what we're going to be talking about today, if anybody caught the promotion, was the idea of leaving the prisoner's cinema. And Thomas, we're going to be talking about that both figuratively and literally today.
Well, over the last couple of years, having studied psychopathology, a lot of it was rooted in neurology and looking at the human brain and seeing how brain functions work. And I wanted to know also the origin of symbols. So I took a real long look at the history of art, particularly Paleolithic art, and I wanted to see what the origins of these symbols came from. And I discovered that there's an actual thing called phosphenes. It's a Greek word that means light show. And they're actually called neurological form constants. They're shapes, they're archetypal shapes that appear inside our dreams or when we close our eyes. And a metaphor that was also used for them is the prisoner's cinema. This is a term that was used because prisoners who were kept in long confinement for long periods of time would start to experience these neurological form constants, visions and shapes that they would see without any kind of light. They would appear in the darkness. And so I thought that was a great metaphor for what we're given. If we're given a prisoner cinema, we're given a light show, we're given a mirage, we're given these ephemeral visual and sensory playthings that are not really what we are. If there was one aspect of all our personalities we should develop, it should be the ability to see the world as it really is and not how we're told it is. And another thing about these neurological form constants, these phosphenes, is that they also form the basis of many of the shapes used in logos. So they've known about this stuff for a long time. The all-seeing eye is one of them, something very similar to it. The five-pointed star, the Celtic cross shape, the dot inside the circle inside the circle, the triangle. All these logos, even today in the age of modern graphics design, they're still using very basic and simple shapes. And that's because these shapes, these neurological form constants, these phosphenes, they actually tap into the archetypal core of our personality and touch us in a very deep way. And they've known this for years. I worked as a graphic designer and I also worked in communications in some very large corporations in New York, and I was trained in this stuff. I knew exactly how to change a document so it could literally be telling you that black was white and people would believe it, using graphics and using a sort of a spellbinding array of words and vernacular and syntax, using graphic, particularly in corporate graphics, are filled with deception. You could have very well educated people looking at these things and thinking that all was dandy, and it was basically telling them that their pension fund had evaporated. So it became a metaphor for everything. The idea, like Plato's allegory of the cave, we're sitting there getting a show, we're looking at the screen, we're trapped and told that the screen, what's on the screen, reality, as they call it, and how we experience it through our five senses, using this brain of ours to navigate through this reality, is the be-all and end-all of things. And the reality is it doesn't have to be like that. And this should come home now, especially at the end of 2012, when an awful sleight of hand and an awful devious concept was played upon the human race, that somehow 2012 would be a turning point, that some people believed we were going to have some kind of spiritual ascension. Some people believed it was going to be the beginning of a new world. And the reality was the whole thing was set up as a gigantic disappointment. And that was for a reason, because it would stop people from having faith in the belief in magic and in the belief of their ability to change things beyond their physical reality. It was designed to destroy people's sense of mystery, and have them all rushing back into a kind of a techno-humanist world where everything is mechanical and we have to depend upon the controlled structures. Now, I'm not putting down the Mayans or anything like that. That calendar was real. That calendar did run out more. Well, it seems to have run out on that date. But I now believe that a lot of this sort of New Age stuff is it's actually designed to two things: infantile, create human beings into sort of like infantile adults, where they don't take responsibilities for their own actions and they have this belief of an external force that's always going to save them, and coupled with the idea that they've been trying to destroy the mainstream religions for centuries, because not because so much that they fear the spirituality or anything that in the mainstream religions, but the mainstream religions have always provided this kind of sense of community for people, even when people are incredibly poor, marginalized, or in a bad way. They have their churches and they have their synagogues and they have their mosques, and this was something that could glue them together, and that's very bad for business. And remember, psychopaths just are only interested in business, are only interested in extracting as much money and as much power and energy out of us as they can for as little effort. And so they saw mainstream religion. And you look back at the Theosophy Society and Blavatsky and all these people, they made no, secret of the fact that they wanted to destroy religion. And they created the New Age movement for this purpose because they knew they couldn't go into their new world, their new reality with the old religions intact. And I really do believe that the whole 2012 thing was drummed up to be part of that. And I think that's why so many people are feeling a sense of despondency right now. But you don't have to feel that way. The idea is that, like, okay, we know where we stand now and where do we go from here. So that's why I've been looking into this idea of the prisoner cinema, both as a metaphor and as actually a reality.
Well, it makes an awful lot of sense. We're basically stuck in these predictive program situations because we've been, subliminally affected by television and whatnot for as long as we have, and we've lost that free will almost, or given it completely away. Someone I was speaking to the other night says, I think everybody deserves to spend some time in jail, and I was horrified at the thought of, that. And he said to me, he goes, but they have to understand, you don't understand all the rights you have until they're completely taken away from you. And people that aren't in prison are giving their rights away daily as if it's nothing. And something just to speak to you about the idea of them destroying religion, would you not say that a lot of these religious sects are not also bleeding their people as well?
Oh yeah, I'm not religious at all. I've no time for religion. I'm just, in terms of its actual, canon, that doesn't interest me at all. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that in the past, these were valuable tools in a community to glue it together. They actually provided a buffer. There was, they weren't always pathological. It wasn't always, say that like it wasn't always like that. There were groups like the Cathars, who were, a very powerful heretical sect in southwestern Europe. In the 11th century, these people were actually loved by everybody. They didn't believe in anything other than sharing kindness. They helping your neighbors. They were like this hippie sort of Hindu Buddhist Christian version, derived from Gnostics and derived from the Gnostic tradition. They lived mostly in Spain and France. Wherever they lived, the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians, the Catholics, they all lived in harmony under these people, and their economies were prosperous, and nobody had a bad word to say about them. So Pope Innocent III launched the first ever crusade in Europe against them, and murdered them under the most appalling and horrific circumstances. If you read some of the testimonies of the Dominican Inquisition at the time, it's hard to believe the inhumanity that was subjected to people who only wanted to live in peace with their neighbors. They just had a very great dislike for the Catholic Church. So, yeah, I agree with you. These massive religious structures are not our friends in terms of how they want to develop us spiritually. You can only find a spiritual path on your own. There's no such thing as a middleman. If there is such a thing as a God, or if there's a higher consciousness or a higher intelligence in the universe, you do not need a middleman to bring it to that. It's a direct communication process. So yeah, that's why these religions exist. But they also, as well, provided a very good social cohesive structure in their time, say up until the 1950s in most Western countries, that was not very good for the control system. Remember, the isolationist movement in the United States that didn't want to go into World War II was predominantly run by the Catholic Church in the US and by mainstream Catholics. So that was one of the reasons, and this is one of the conspiracy theories you can actually point your finger to and say it's absolutely true, is that the Rockefeller Foundation set up a committee to basically destroy the isolationist movement leading up to World War II with the indirect blessing of FDR. And a big target of that was going after Catholic churches and Catholic spokespeople who did not want to get into another great war. So that's why they invented this sort of, after the post-war period, this kind of idea of the New Age to destroy that. But I do agree with you. You don't need those churches either.
It's gotten to the point almost where you can see where New Age has been directing everybody to some kind of semi-meditative state where you sit on your butt and do absolutely nothing. This is going to the extreme, though. At the same time, it almost seems like all the religions have all been geared for the same outcome of the end of the film. It's all about taking all of our control away from ourselves, putting it into the hands of somebody else, and we're all not worthy and working towards being worthy for some other end while we're looking for a savior. It's always outside of ourselves. And this is exactly what they want, which is the point that you're coming to.
Exactly. The whole idea of these systems is to externalize your own potential for something beyond yourself, to look for salvation in someone else, to look for salvation in something else. So you never actually look at yourself and say, well, can I save myself in this situation? We're almost like a society of like battered women who live with this guy who's beating us up, and we can't leave because we're afraid we wouldn't be able to support ourselves and the kids. It's the same idea. They've inflicted the same kind of mentality upon us. And you drill this stuff enough into somebody's head, it literally will rewire their brain, change their neuroplasticity to actually believe that you can't change this system. It's the way it always is. I always need someone to take care of me, no matter how abusive they are. Anyone who's worked with like battered women will tell you that they actually have to literally deprogram them to get them out of some of these relationships, because they've been so programmed by their sort of pathological other half. And the same, that's how we are on the grand scale. We never think of turning away and saying to ourselves, look, this is enough. We can't deal with this anymore, because it's like I remember seeing a play years ago in Broadway with Denzel Washington. I think it was called Checkmates. And it was about a very angry African American guy, but he was also a very successful African American guy. He had a lot of money, had a great job, he was good looking. And they were renting an apartment from an elderly African American couple upstairs. And the old guy upstairs was much more happy and much more relaxed than the young guy who had all the advantages in the world downstairs. And the old guy at the end of the play goes down and gives him a lecture, and he says to me, you know what you're like? He says, you're like the dog that the owner ties to a pole in the middle of a field, and the dog runs around in a circle with a chain around his neck. And then one day, the pole is removed from the ground, but does the dog run away to freedom? No, it keeps going around and around in the circle. And I thought that was a fantastic metaphor in that play. And that's what we are in many ways. So many people are like that. Even if you took the pole out of the ground and you said to them, go make a run for it, they'll keep running around in a circle. We've been programmed from everything from our education system to, as you said, the media is constantly hitting us, that it's very difficult for people to imagine another way to live. And the reality is it's not that difficult. It just takes that one step away. And when you take that one step away, you'll find that the actual ability to transcend the prisoner cinema will take 2 steps towards you. But that first step is very, very terrifying for a lot of people. And people will go to enormous lengths not to take that first step, because an integral part of that is almost like an initiation rite where you have to come to terms with your own shadow. And a lot of people don't want to actually sit and say to themselves, I'm living a really stupid life here. I work, for a job I hate, a company I hate. I vote for politicians every 4 years who don't do anything they say they do, and they bring in the same system. and they don't want to move beyond that, because then they'd have to look at themselves and say, you know what, I'm really wasting my life now. I'm really living a lie. I'm really living a phony existence. And that's coming to terms with the shadow. And a lot of people will not do that. And that's the point. That's the point when you turn away from the screen in the prison or cinema and you head towards the door. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. And they know that. They know this about us. They make us incredibly neurotic by having us worrying about petty fears, what our friends will think of us, what our families will think of us, what may be revealed about ourselves to ourselves when we start to break away and start thinking for ourselves. Anyone, you know yourself, when people do wake up, when we have that waking up moment, it's a combination of, you know, static wonderment, uh, incredible, sense of awareness, coupled with a terrifying fear. And that's what that terrifying fear has been programmed into us to stop us from moving out and getting beyond that. And things like 2012 and belief in some kind of rapture or something's going to come and collect us and save us, that's a similar kind of trap. It's not a pathological, it is, it's subtly pathological, or it's passively pathological, in the sense that it puts an idea of, oh, your salvation will come through some other system, but it never ever does. I mean, the book of Revelations was written over 2,000 years ago, and it was supposed to happen within the period of that Roman Emperor Nero. 2,000 years later, it still hasn't happened, and people are still expecting it for it to happen. Isn't it time that you said, or these people said to themselves, I've been living a lie expecting this. It's time to actually become my own savior.
Yeah, because there's something, you can go to all kinds of religious texts, but I'm just going to turn around and say, you can't take people out of Babylon. They have to take themselves out. And it's part of that, the idea of when you awaken, it comes also with a lot of teenage angst and rebellion, which is, all those feelings of denial, wanting to rebel against it, not knowing how, that paralyzing fear of, what do we do now, and can I actually do anything? And you go through self-loathing. You go through loathing others because of that self-loathing. There's so many different emotions. And then there's like that freeing reality of what you need to do, putting it into practice and actually getting out there to do it. It's baby steps, and it's something that nobody can just do straight off the hop. Boom, it's done. It doesn't work that way.
No, and it doesn't work by watching YouTube videos and sharing them on Facebook. You've got to get it. I remember when the Occupy movement thing first started, Facebook and all the other sites were all filled with, yeah, the big changes here. The world is waking up, and they'd have pictures of movements. But you're just sitting at home sharing pictures. You're not actually doing anything. You're not actually changing the world. You're expecting someone else on Facebook or someone else on YouTube or someone else in a photograph in a newspaper to change it for you, or some celebrity like Susan Sarandon or Michael Moore. These people are waiting for it to change them. Again, that's doing nothing. It's not it's not doing anything. The idea is to walk away, not to walk with the masses into another trap or another version of the control. You see, like, I'm glad you said that about when you do wake up, you sort of feel with a sense of contempt for others too as well. That's one of the reasons I'll never use the word sheep ever again, to describe the unwoken people. I've done it before, but I won't do it anymore, because I realize there's an inherent kind of elitism built into that as well. It also dehumanizes people who haven't woken up. And you see, there's also an element that when people say, oh, they're a bunch of sheep, they haven't woken up yet. What a lot of people who say that really mean is they haven't woken up to release me yet. You understand?
That's right.
Like,
waiting for somebody else to take care of the job.
You got to wake up the sheep. Why? Because, well, then we'll have a new change in everything. Why are you depending on them? You see, it's passing over the personal responsibility.
No, definitely. It's completely passing over responsibility. And you know what? It's part of it is looking at that part of yourself that you don't like from the past and putting that down. And I have to say that you have to forgive yourself for being lost in it. It happened. Get over it and move forward. And part of the idea of the whole Facebook, I agree with you completely, because there are those that just sit. A lot of us do it and post to gain momentum, and we're trying to encourage others. And that's something that we need to speak to as well, because we know that people aren't just sitting on their butts, but a lot of them, the majority of them are. And sitting in front of the computer and posting is doing no good to anybody, especially when you're going on and on and on and on and on about all the negativity without any solutions or presenting them in your own lives. Like, what are you doing to change your own life? If you feel the need to sit there and say what's wrong with the world, here it is, post, 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 enter, 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 enter. You know, with that enter key, what are you doing, or are you just adding to the chaotic madness?
Yeah, well, we've been trained, haven't we? Like, it's just like people who follow sports teams fanatically. When that, multi-millionaire player scores a goal or puts a ball through a net in the basketball court, you're not doing that. So why is that an achievement for you? And it's the same kind of idea. So we've been programmed like this since we were in school. School is, formal and state education has done a tremendous disservice in this way, because of the way they've actually taught, and educated us. They've basically switched off the right brain, put the left brain in control, and we're always in a state of kind of, neurochemical, neurological chaos where we're trying to steer. It's almost like a charioteer is trying to steer a chariot with to control the horses with one wheel, and the chariot is bigger than the other. You can only go so fast. And that's what they've done to us. They've put us in a position where we're always asking for the expert, always asking for the revolutionary, always asking for the Marxist, the communist, the radical, whatever, to the religious extremist to save people, or even the great pacifist or the great social rights or civil rights leader. You'll find when anyone who ever had a sincere intention to get up there and change the world and really mobilized people, they were nearly always killed. I'm talking about people like Malcolm X, some like people like John Lennon. They were always given a warning first, and then they were eventually killed. And this is what, and even Martin Luther King, towards the end of his life, he became very radical. There's two Martin Luther Kings. There's one that like spoke about "I have a dream," and there was another Martin Luther King who was as radical towards, especially after the murder of Malcolm X, who was very intense. And the next thing you know, he's shot. And they give us people like Jesse Jackson, who are back to the sort of like, harmless. Oh, let's vote for the Democrat Party, and that will solve all our problems. And so you'll always find that if there's someone sincere does get up there and does get a bit of power, when you put your faith in them, they'll be taken out. It always happens. It always happens.
Well, a
So
lot of
it's
that,
almost like,
sorry, not to
go ahead.
interrupt you, but the idea is that we're making a big mistake. Yes, they're helping to lead. Leaders create more leaders. They don't create followers, and that's what they're afraid of, because these leaders that they're killing are the ones that are telling you to stand up for yourself, not to wait for somebody else. These are. I go back to a spirit science parable, patch parable about reluctant messiahs, and there's these squids that are attached to the rocks, and the one squid, he's like, I'm just going to let go. And they're like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, no, really, look at the current. It obviously knows where it's going and nothing's happening that's, bad. I'm going to let go. And all the other squids are like, no, man, you got to stay where you are. The squid lets go. And instead of them being happy and letting go as well, they would worship the fact that he was free, doing it on his own. But he was a messiah now, not somebody that they could join, but somebody that they could only worship and look up to and look for answers from. And when he was gone, instead of, just trying what he did, they decided to build a monument to him and worship him. That's what we have done. We've completely given away our option of saving ourselves half the time, because so much of the indoctrination has us waiting for somebody else to do it for us.
Yeah, and then the squids that are still on the rocks, they're waiting for him to come back to save them again. But he can't come
Exactly.
back. He can't come back because he's washed downstream.
That's right.
And so but they know that. They know there's an impossibility to it. That impossibility is almost like a moral, psychological, personal kind of social insurance policy that we don't actually have to do anything. He'll come back. But deep down inside, they know he's never going to come back. But it doesn't matter. It's a handy excuse not to do anything with your own life.
Yeah, for sure. And then, to build a whole bunch of fear around the idea that you can't do anything with your own life because of all these exterior things that really, when it comes down to it, doesn't infect your interior. Your interior is where it all is, but we're totally missing the point.
Exactly. Well, they don't want us focus. They don't want the individual They talk about like individual rights and individual expression, but they don't really want that. That's just lip service. They do not want individuals. They want conformist robots who do exactly as they're told, because that's what they want, machine people. This is what the humanist movement is and the transhumanist movement is. It's really these are people who are at war with the human spirit or the human consciousness, the underlying agent or ghost behind the machine. They're so obsessed with trying to destroy it that they first reduced mankind to the idea of just being a biological robot. This is what Mary Shelley was getting at when she wrote Frankenstein. The idea that the Frankenstein wasn't so much building an artificial man, but he was killing God. He was killing the idea of the spirit in man. And that's where this whole transhumanism comes from. They're so obsessed with proving that the higher aspects of humanity doesn't exist that they're willing to wipe out humans just to prove it, because they know that our spirit and our humanity are interlinked as the same thing. And this is what's done this is all part of the same idea of getting rid of the individual, getting rid of the free thinker. And this is the problem, because as long as somebody still has a free thought in their head, we cannot be fully, completely controlled by them. And they live in fear of this. I mean, they absolutely live in fear. You see the lengths that they go to. You know, you read the work of Saul Alinsky and people like that. They actually see us as, you know, laboratory rats or laboratory animals that have to be controlled. They live in fear of us. They live in fear of how our humanity and our expression, and even things like our creativity, they won't allow us any kind of creativity outside their creativity. And even when it does happen, even when this creativity does come about, they'll co-opt it immediately. I'm thinking of something like, hip hop. That came out of South Bronx amongst terrible urban degeneration and decay in the late 1970s. A whole community that had been destroyed by Robert Moses' urban planning. Young people start to develop this idea of, like, instead of fighting in gangs, of actually developing this hip hop culture. It was incredibly successful, happened very quickly, and what happens next? MTV gets a hold of it and turns it into gangster rap. And the next thing they're singing about bitches and killing people and stuff like that. And it's just in time to fill the prison industrial complex where, they could then, and just at the same time, the tree strikes and your outlaw comes in. And then all of a sudden they have millions of young people who are now free workers in prison serving long sentences, manufacturing everything from license plates to jeans. They're very, very, very frightened of us developing any kind of culture or any kind of independent expression on our own, because it's ultimately they are the tools that which can bring them down, and that's why they co-opt it, shut it down, and gulag it as soon as possible.
And it's so easy to do. You can see it being done in the truth community. Since its inception, since we started really looking for truth, the first thing they did was grab onto whoever they could and make sure that they're creating disinformation within what we're looking at and categorizing as the truth that we're seeking.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that the so-called movement it's frightening if people knew the infiltration. It's frightening if people knew the level of control that's coming from the intelligence services. It's quite disturbing, actually. So many things are just deliberate, particularly anything to do with 911. There's as much booby traps and as much things in there to get people looking like fools, saying ridiculous things and getting caught up in issues that are non-issues, while they push on with all kinds of agendas, because you're locked. You're locked and you're trapped within this quagmire of this event that happened 11 years ago. Or, there's so much of that goes on, and much of it is to sustain, this idea of stagnation. Spend 10 years, 20 years, 100 years talking and debating about the minutiae of certain aspect of geopolitical events while you don't actually move forward. But they're moving forward, doing what they want to do, changing the world, while, after 50 years, people are still talking about, specific minute details that have long become irrelevant and were probably put in there deliberately to begin with in order to trap people in those things. You see, it's very interesting how this all works. They don't want, in order to get rid of the next generation of the Malcolm X's and so on, they don't want that. They look for intelligent people, and then they throw them off on a tangent into a world of, like, nonsense, into a world of sort of anything that doesn't have anything to do with reality. And this is a way of stopping these people from radicalizing and being an actual threat to the political structure. So what they do is they trap them in these things. You'll find that many people who are awake and they're often very bright, but they're wasting their intellect, they're wasting their wisdom, and they're wasting their creativity by looking at woo and things that are not relevant to the reality of the world we live in. And that's the whole point, because if those people were actually to, you know, properly sit down and think about things and not be influenced by like things like YouTube videos and reports and documents and constantly looking for, missing secrets, they could actually do something that could change things. They could actually come up with new ideas to change things rather than, being caught up in the same old fear cycle. And that's a very devious trap that's been played. That's been going on since the 1970s. People have been trapped in weird kind of situations. Bright, intelligent people who should be out there changing the world, but they're chasing after phantoms that don't exist.
It's incredibly difficult to find a balance in it all because you feel some kind of, I've been guilty of exactly what you're talking about, because you feel some kind of responsibility to share the knowledge that you've learned, but you get trapped in rabbit holes and you find
Oh, yeah.
yourself kind of spiral down into them. And then, like, if you've got somewhat of a command of your intellect, you can get yourself out of it, but nonetheless, it happens.
And it's not even command of intellect. It's almost pride in so many people. They don't want to make the mistake that they were probably wrong about things. That's something they believed in for 5 or 6 years, that they picked up on some YouTube video or some radio show host or some, truth movement guru was complete and utter ridiculous nonsense. They're very difficult for them to say I was really wrong to believe in that. That was how did I ever believe in that? And it's almost like we're back to the idea of the dysfunctional relationship again. You have to admit that it doesn't work in order to escape it.
Well, you
And
know
there's
what?
nothing wrong. And you learn from your mistakes. You
Well,
learn
that
from them. So there's nothing wrong with
exactly.
that.
And the thing is, though, is that people say, well, you change too much. But that's the thing. You have to be constantly changing. There's that Walt Whitman quote that I absolutely love. What is it? Oh, I don't have it off the top of my head. But the idea that I am huge, I am going to change. Do I contradict myself? Of course I do. It's forever a process. Yes, I'm going to be online with something, and then I'm going to get to the bottom of it and either still fully support it or turn around and go, oh, wait a minute, no, that's not right. And a lot of people are very afraid. I sat in silence this summer and said nothing for 3 months because I didn't want to rock the boat. When I finally did, I was free from it. But at the same time, there was so much stigma that was floating around in my head to get to that point.
Mm. And that's the chain. That's the internal chain that has you chained to the pole. One of the things about being awake is having the ability to say, I was wrong. I was wrong about this stuff and I was wrong about that stuff, and then go back and then critically evaluate it. And then what you've learned then is you've learned from your mistakes. It's almost like the intellectual version of what Nietzsche said, what doesn't destroy me or what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger. There's nothing wrong with error. There's nothing wrong with mistake. Unfortunately, there's lots of these sort of people who make YouTube videos and they attack people in this truth movement by saying things like, oh, he's wrong or she's wrong and stuff like that. But so what? Politicians are wrong every day of the week. Philosophers have been wrong for centuries. They make mistakes. This is how it is. This is how human existence works. There's a transient flux of change between different variables, and that's actually what's creating the universe going forward when you think about it. And if we have stagnation, that leads to fascism. The last thing an alternative movement needs is a dogma and a set of rules to apply by and say there's nothing else beyond this. That would be the end of it, to have a charter to say thou shalt believe in this and thou shalt never question this. And then we're back in the same old, silliness that the mainstream system has, where we have to sign up to charters and dogmas. That's not the point. To me, the purpose of the alternative movement is the flexibility to allow yourself to have errors of judgment as a human being, and then to say to yourself, this is part of my humanity. This is who I am. These are my mistakes. I take ownership of them, but I've learned from them. And if you can't deal with that, that's not my problem. That's your problem. But I have to go and look at some other things. And a tremendously terrifying and liberating thing as well, because there's all sorts of gatekeepers within the alternative movement who want to shut people down into certain little pockets of where they don't question anything. And this is not healthy, because this is, again, the same pathological prisoner cinema, but it's in the alternative world. There's nothing wrong with changing your opinions once you're sincere about them and you're not just doing it to job or to be look cool or be look fashionable. The purpose of changing your opinions is because you've grown as a person. You've learned something new. You've moved off on a new tangent. And that's cool. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, you know what? And that's part of the last show that I did was the idea of just being able to allow yourself to be okay with the fact that you're going to be making these mistakes, and to be forgiving and not beat yourself up. We beat ourselves up so badly, and there's no need for it. Just don't do it again.
Yeah, and you learn from it. And when you learn from something, then you're more efficient in how you process information. It's very good to be critical. I'm just as people. I know I am, but other people should be too. But I wasn't always. Are just as critical as the alternative media as I am as the mainstream. That's the way I should be,
You
because that's
have to
normal.
be. You
That
have no
doesn't mean
idea.
that doesn't mean I think the mainstream is better. That doesn't mean I think the mainstream and the alternative are equal. That just means that I'm looking at this thing objectively, and I'm saying, if does this resonate with me? See, I'm a great believer in intuition. There's these noetic truths that once you hear them, they sit so well with you that they don't even need validation. They don't need a foundation. They just sort of sing in your heart. This is right. It's just like when you look at someone and you immediately connect with them as a person. You don't have to say a word. The eye contact is enough alone to know that you've actually resonated at some very deep, noetic, non-material level with this. And the same thing happens with information. When you hear something, when you hear a piece of music for the first time, or you hear a piece of information, or you read a poem or something for the first time, the unbridled and clear truth that comes true, that nothing else is required to back it up. You know it's right, and that's all you have to believe in. But you don't have to then go and convince people that this is the truth, because I'll tell you, that's another trap that's set up for us. If somebody hears something and it immediately resonates with them, and they tell a very skeptical person, the person will say, "Where's the peer reviews? Where's the empirical evidence? Where are the comparative studies? This does not sit in with the mainstream." And then people go mad trying to validate these beliefs by posting them a YouTube video, or using some quote that may or may not be true, or some historical document that may or may not be true. And then they become incredibly frustrated, while the person who's like skeptical in the mainstream says, "Well, you prove nothing." Well, that's because they prove nothing in their stadium. You prove nothing in their stadium of absolute empirical evidence, reductionist, materialistic proof, which is, I'm not putting that stuff down, it has its own place too as well. But if you have a noetic insight, if you have a vision, there's a difference between a vision and a dream. A dream is a fantasy. A vision is a magical insight. And if you have that insight, you don't have to justify it to anybody, because you know that's right inside you. And that's why intuition plays a huge part in this. So people need to be more, going into 2013 in this post 2012 era, is to jump into the intuition. Don't look, if something sounds wonderful, try and look at it objectively, and if it still feels right, try to process the information on a sort of not, I wouldn't say spiritual, but a sort of an intuitive level. You'll then know if it's good or it's not, or if it's right for you. And it's right for you to go with that idea, or to bring that, to incorporate that concept into your life. So that would be one of the tools in this toolkit, I would say, to get out of the prisoner cinema, is the application of your own intuitive insights going forward. Just because somebody says something is bang on, it has a very nice video with some good music and some nice graphics, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the truth. You're probably being changed, because you're basically, what they're doing is, people, it's like the idea that people confuse chemical love with real love. Infatuation comes from the Latin word infatuate, which means to be made foolish. That's what infatuation is. It's not the same thing when you have a crush on a girl or something like that in school, or a guy, whatever. You meet a guy in a bar and you think he's like really handsome or something like that, and you have a bit of a crush on him. That's not the same thing as the love that a mother has for her child, or the love that two people have been together for years have for each other. That's the real love that works at the lower level, on the, well, not the lower level, it's actually the higher level, of the intuitive higher level. It's not based on, endorphins and hormones and dopamine and other, neurological chemicals. It's something that goes much deeper, and we also have to process information on the same way, instead of getting all hyped up by some kind of truth jocks who are screaming and, shouting on the radio and trying to, build up fear and build up elation, to have us modulating between these two states, basically where our brain chemistry is in charge of our critical judgment. Sit back, process the information. No, it doesn't sound right. Yeah, it does sound right. And then go with it, but go with it in a casual way. Don't sign up for it as if it's absolute truth or it's the absolute falsehood, because you'll find that the truth lies somewhere between the two extremes in just about everything.
It's so very true. And also the idea that, I remember being asked, how can you prove about this, creator that you believe in? Because I believe in something. I don't even know what, but I believe that we came from somewhere. I believe that we have that spark of creation within us. Now, my belief can't be explained, so I don't try. I don't
Yeah,
want to. I don't want to. It's not that I'm afraid to talk about it. It's just that I don't feel the need to, because I know that there's no possible way that it's going to be the same as anybody else's experience, because it's personal to me. And we should really stop trying to force people to believe in what we believe in. If you want to talk to me about it, sure, I can talk about it, but I don't, the minute someone says, well, prove it, I don't even have the desire to anymore. That was a huge step for me. It doesn't matter whether I don't believe in what you believe in, and I don't need you to prove me right, and I don't need to prove myself right. I just don't care anymore in that regard.
yeah, that's a great maturing process. It's a great place to be. When you get to that level, it feels amazing. Your whole relationship with all kinds of people changes, because you're no longer in a sort of a confrontational kind of relationship with other people who may share different opinions. You just relax and see things as they are, and you go with the flow. There's nothing, there's nothing about that isn't wonderful. If we could all live like that, we'd have a much different society. But again, we go back to formal and public education. That, Ivan Illich, in his book Deschooling Society, which is a classic book from the 70s, he just says that the purpose of education is to condition people to believe that everything is okay just as it is, and if anything is challenged outside the norm, it cannot be disproven or proven. It just gets pushed away. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Now, as relation in terms of this higher aspect of ourselves, like, I used to be a very extreme atheist. I used to be, like, because of growing up in Ireland in the 70s and the 80s with all the troubles in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants, I used to be an extreme atheist. I used to hate all kinds of, like, ideas of spirituality. I used to think it was a kind of a pollution upon the human race. It caused nothing but misery. But I was doing the mistake that so many people in the mainstream do, is I was confusing spirituality with religion, because that's what they told us what spirituality was, and spirituality is a completely different thing than religion.
Exactly.
And that's the whole point. And when someone says to me now, "What do you believe in God?" and I'll say, "Well, I don't believe in a being in the sky. I don't, but I do believe there's something really amazing beyond this five sense reality, and it's ultimately where we all come from, and it's ultimately the controlling system of what we are in this reality." And that's all I know, but I do know there's something beyond this. And then they say to me, "Well, how can you prove that?" And I'll say, human consciousness. The day that science can prove that human consciousness is in the actual brain and memories are stored in the brain, the day that they can prove that, that's the day that you've won. And they're so far from proving that, because they're looking for human consciousness inside the brain. It's not in the brain any more than Kim Kardashian is in your TV when you switch it off. Thank God. But it's like just like that. It's just like that. And they're looking for a switched off TV for, Leave It to Beaver or other TV shows. They're gone. And that's where we are. Our consciousness is using this body, and this, particularly the brain and nervous system, to navigate within this five sense reality. And that's enough for me. That's enough for me to know there's something amazing beyond this. And even other things, like the way there's insects and plants have evolved independently, where, the insect is the only insect that can pollinate this particular flower, and the insect germinates on the same night as the flower opens. We're talking about flora and insects. there's some kind of communication software that runs between those two different creatures, those two different aspects of creation. And that cannot be explained through Darwinian evolution, as many things like that can't be explained. I'm not saying that Darwinian evolution is wrong. I actually think it's probably right, but I think the underlying thing is consciousness is programmed it from the beginning. Somehow, maybe some kind of proto-consciousness evolved, and from that, well, it probably always existed, and from that we've built everything up going forward. So that's why when I say tell people that get ready for evolution, I'm talking about the evolution of the consciousness that changes everything else. So that would be my answer to that. Like when you can explain consciousness, then you can tell me that we're just flesh robots. Until that point comes along, we both have the right to hold these opinions.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's talk transhumanism, because transhumanism is something that maybe not all the listeners understand. So why don't we go from there and talk about what transhumanism is, and how it's undermining humanity completely.
Well, to strip transhumanism down to its basic form, there's too many of us for the business model going forward. We're coming towards a post-industrial society. There's vast numbers of human beings. There's not going to be enough manufacturing because of new technological processes on automation and everything from biotechnology, agriculture to heavy engineering. There's no need for the numbers of humans that they needed in the past. 200 years ago, at the birth of the Industrial Revolution, they moved people, particularly in places like England and Germany, from the countryside into the cities, and these cities grew overnight. That world has now ended. These people still exist. There's still millions of us, but there's not the economy. See, we don't fit into our business plan, so they have to get rid of us. Now, transhumanism divides really into two things: the idea of that we're heading towards a post-humanist society where humans really don't have a place in the world anymore. They see us as a pollutant upon the earth. We're not, a carbon footprint, or we're not, carbon friendly. There's too many of us. Where our lifestyles are too good, and so we have to be replaced, but removed for that reason first. So that's what transhumanism, in that sense, would be expressed by things like birth control, population reduction, reducing family size, creating a situation where both parents work, so there's less chance of a family life, families becoming smaller. This is always something I always had a big problem with, was the idea that Catholics used to get like such stick for having like 10 and 11 kids, when it was absolutely their own business. They had if they wanted to have 10 and 11 kids, that was their own business. But that was also the beginning of the transhumanist thing. Oh, we should only have one or two kids. See, it all came out of Malthusian sort of economics, that there was too many people in the earth, and ridiculous notions that the earth could only support like a couple of million people, and it's still going on to this day. So that would be the first part. The other part of transhumanism would be the belief that they could take the soul of a person, the essence of a person, and that I'm talking about in a materialistic sense here, not in a kind of a spiritual or conscious sense, but the actual idea that they could find a human being inside the neurons and inside the neurology of a person, and then implant it into some kind of machine where you could live forever. Well, that's not for us. That's for anyone who has the money. But that wouldn't work anyway, because we're not inside our synapses. We're not inside our cerebral partitions. We're just not in there. There's not a neurosurgeon in the world who could actually show you, Carrie Lee inside your brain where you're stored. You're just only in there for a momentary impulse as the synapses are firing. You're coming in from somewhere else, just like the rest of us. So they have this misguided belief that they're going to upload their consciousness into a machine. Aaron Franz wrote a very good book called Revolve. He'd be a good guest to have, Mankind's Ascent to Godhood. And he showed how basically it's ultimately a spiritual idea rooted in alchemy. That the idea of these like elites, they want to live forever through machines. So that's what transhumanism really is. It's really the removal of the human from the earth, replaced with a machine human that lives forever in a kind of an elite class, because we're no longer suited to the business model they have going forward. It's quite disgusting. It's quite horrible, and it's not rooted in anything altruistic. They'll show you things like kids or people who had spinal injuries, or they lost their arms with mechanical arms, and this is fantastic stuff. But these people have been, this is incredible technology, and it's wonderful, and long may that kind of stuff continue. But that's not really what transhumanism is. That's like stage one. That's like a Model T Ford. What they want is the Ferrari. The Ferrari is the human that doesn't exist anymore in the current form that we are. And it's a very twisted and psychopathic notion, because that somehow life, the meaning of life is only to have chronological time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's not about sensual experiences. It's not about the richness of life, the richness of experience, the fullness of life. It's purely about a chronological existence. And that tells you a lot about the mentality of the people pushing this, that they only measure their existence by how many years they've lived on this earth.
Well, to some extent, it comes down to the culling of all the savage tribes, as they would call them, since the beginning of time. The less that they take us away from nature, and the more connected we are to nature, is the more threatened that they are by us. Because we are meant to be living in a natural surrounding and not this mechanical industrial complex that we've been stuck into. And the idea of being in a natural surrounding is something that, like I said, really threatens them because that's not what they want. They want us all living in the proverbial matrix.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is why the indigenous cultures have always. Well, there's been two reasons why the indigenous cultures have been wiped out by quote unquote civilization. One is that you cannot put systems and methodologies on an indigenous native tribe. It just can't be done. They're not like that. They have a completely different relationship to themselves and their environment. So you have to mechanize them in somehow. The best way to do that is killing most of them, and then taking the ones who run that society, the leaders or whatever, and then westernizing them, or bringing them around, indoctrinating them into the sort of the machine mind of Western civilization. There's another reason for it as well. Indigenous people are very, very aware of intuitive insights. They can look at someone and tell if they're evil or not. This is why there's so few psychopaths in indigenous cultures, because they just know they exist. They're even aware of them when they're born. They'll pick up the child, and the child will have a completely different epigenetic resonance. They will know this child is not one of theirs. It may seem harsh and cruel, but this is how they keep psychopaths out of their society. They know these things. They're aware of them. There's a book by Paul Levy called Wetiko or Wetiko. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's about the idea that it's actually a Native American Cree term, meaning like basically it's the evil ones who live amongst us, who breed amongst us, and the people in indigenous cultures all over the world are aware of the idea of a sort of pathological infection, a pathological virus of the consciousness that gets in, and that's what Western society right now. We're polluted by that. And the idea of this consciousness is completely predatory and completely, driven towards its own self-destruction through its need to have everything all at once, all at the same time, which is capitalism. And this is what they went after the natives for. They always talk about, indigenous tribes and indigenous cultures and how they're so wonderful. And they send anthropologists out all over the world. We get these documentaries like Tribe on the BBC. But really, what they're not showing us anything other than sort of like what they eat and how they live. They don't give us an insight into their view of the world. And an indigenous person has a very, very different view of reality than the rest of us. Very different. This was brought home to me in a book by, it's called, I can't think of the name of it now. It'll come to me. But it was about the Italian, the last European shamanic group, the Benedate. And the book was talking about these Italian shamanistic tribes that like literally lived in the hills of Italy and some of the Balkans right up until the 17th century, until the Inquisition wiped them out. And because they were a Western society and literate, the Inquisition took very good notes of them. And you can tell by reading these people's notes, they had a very different view of reality than, say, like the mainstream. They believed that all suffering and problems came from outside this, through sort of like a sense of an evil that comes in. And you have to battle these demons in the sort of shamanic world. This is a very common thing in all kinds of. When they say demons, it doesn't literally mean demons. It means negative forces in the shamanic world, so they do not manifest in this world. The book is called The Night Battles. It was written by Carlo Ginzburg. Very, very interesting book. And this is another reason they wipe out native cultures, because there's a sense of the shaman or the druid in the native culture had this sense of being almost like a sense of stewardship, where they went out of this reality in a shamanic state. Even if it was just a psychological or sort of like a psychosomatic thing, it didn't matter. It still had the function of cleaning up the psychology of the existing tribe as it existed in the current structure. So there wouldn't be. So the idea would be that if they took care of something, they took care of evil outside this reality, it wouldn't manifest into this. And what's remarkable about this book, The Night Battles by Carlo Ginzburg, is that even the Inquisition admits that when they stopped the Bernardate, things like rapes and murders and robberies actually happened more frequently. So it was working for them. If they were actually really fighting demonic forces outside there, I don't know. If it was a psychological thing, could have been. Who knows? But the fact of the matter was that this stuff actually works. The idea of leaving ourselves, going into a kind of a trance, dealing with problems there, and then stopping them from preventing into this world is common through all native and all indigenous cultures. And that's not existing in the West. We deal with our problems and our dysfunctionalities and our pathological types, if we deal with them at all. Usually we just vote them and put them in government, or they run corporations. But they are actually here in this reality. There's no sense of togetherness. We're literally have been invaded by this sort of this pathogen of pernicious sort of like psychopathic energy that's come upon us. And that's exactly how it felt coming up towards 2012. It felt like there was this bubble that was just building and building and building, almost like we were being mocked. And it felt very, very powerful up until New Year's Eve. And after New Year's Eve, things started to calm down a bit. But there's a sense of intense sort of like this sort of like tension that was there. It left, but it was replaced by a kind of despondency in many people. Ironically enough, there was a huge solar flare at the moment that happened, which I don't know if that means anything or if that's part of it. Hey, maybe it is, but that was an interesting kind of like coincidence at the same time. But this is because we're not dealing with our problems outside ourselves. It's the same thing again. We have to deal with the battle is within. The salvation is within. The change is within. And the whole idea of ritual magic, the term change is used. That's what magic means, to cause change in the material world by taking an idea inside the non-material world in your mind and bringing it to reality. So that's why artists are very good at seeing the future before it happens. That's why they can tap into these forces a little bit better than other people. But we can all do this. And this is what they don't want. This is what the indigenous cultures have very powerfully. And the West, particularly things like the Inquisition, went around the world and destroyed this kind of thing because they were terrified of it ever getting back to Europe, because we once had that stuff too, before, say, the Roman Empire. And that's what we have to grasp in 2013 going forward. We have to start becoming almost like our own shaman, our own druid, our own kind of like holy man or holy woman, that we start looking inside ourselves.
Well, it's time for us to take responsibility for ourselves.
Exactly.
And see that we can do it ourselves and not look outside, which is something that we're so used to going to the shaman or the sage or the wise woman or the wise man, and really quieting yourself on the inside, kind of throwing not logic out the window, but creating some kind of marriage between your soul and your mind, so that you can think on a spiritually logical level instead of just this machine and mechanical level. It makes complete sense.
Solutions. Yeah, and find practical solutions in your life. Find a new, maybe if you think there's a business you can start. There's nothing unspiritual about that. If it's some kind of idea you have to make and sell something, if you want to make jewelry and sell it, do it. That's you taking control. So you're not working for a boss all of a sudden. You're in charge. And things like that, taking the fluoride out of your water if you're in a fluoridated area, growing your own vegetables, doing your own thing, learning how to fix your own home up so you don't have to depend on calling people around. Things like learning how to live with less so you actually can you're actually ultimately living with more.
Yeah, it's just being able to understand that the divorcing yourself from the world and reequating yourself with nature is a huge part of this.
Exactly.
And understanding that they seem to think that we're all the savages now, we're all tribal, and that's something I was wondering about and what your thoughts are. In the West, we seem to be really set on the idea that we need to reconnect. You see everybody in these mass meditations, and we have this desire. You can see it. There's an actual desire to do that, disconnect in order to reconnect. And a lot of these outside movements, that are running through the new age and whatever the case may be, they're working very hard to make sure that they miss the plot. The majority of people miss the plot and end up latching onto something that's outside of themselves. But for the most part, now to the elite, we are all the savages. And as we seem to reawaken to the idea that we have to be more self-governing, because you can see it, it's there. There's massive awakenings that are going on with the protests and everything else, that I think that anybody would be foolish to think, no, everybody's still that much suppressed. Yes, there's suppression there. But they have to be afraid when they see everybody actually doing the searching on the inside.
Oh yeah, it's only a veil of it's only a veil of incarceration. It's not a solid wall. It only takes a few to get over that, to pass through that veil, and the rest will actually intrinsically follow. Now, the ones that move ahead don't have to call the others. The others will be inspired by it and actually will travel with them eventually in time. And there'll always be ones who won't, but that's okay too. Maybe their time isn't here. But that's exactly it. The idea of looking through the understanding the thinness of that veil, understanding the thinness of that deception, and then moving through it it's like it's like incredibly empowering. Anyone who's done it will tell you was an amazing experience. Even if they only did it for a few years, they dropped out and went to live in sort of an alternative community, and then after a few years maybe they went back into the mainstream. But they've always talked fondly of those years where they lived in a kind of a commune or a kind of a hippie community, and how happy it was and how amazing it was. And that's what we all have to grasp. We have to look for that, and that's again, it comes from the individual. It doesn't come from the group. You have to enter into the pact to be a slave, and you have to remove yourself from the pact in order to be liberated.
So where does the solution lie in this? What is, and now I'm asking outside of myself, but in your humble opinion, where do you see the solution in this for people? We've obviously, it's been spelled out what it is that we're up against, and many of us already knew. But where do we go from here?
Well, there's never going to be a mass awakening or a mass movement or a mass spiritual uplifting. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. There's been so many, disappointments in that regard, and there always will be. The only future now is to look into yourself, like you said, find solutions that you can implement in your own life, and then find like-minded people or people in your own family who share the same values and have them move with you. That doesn't mean you have to be dependent upon them. It means that you share these feelings with them. You share these ideas with them. You share these concepts with them. And you have a sense of community that exists outside the mainstream community. But it doesn't have to be anything that's validated in terms of a complete structure or some kind of dogma or minutes of a meeting or anything like that. It's something that flows very well. Becoming very strong in the idea that we really do have to start learning how to live in the present and not worried about the future. We have to live sort of like in that sense. It doesn't mean we have to be selfish or anything like that, but take one day at a time. If you get up in the morning and you can get out of bed by yourself and you can survive that day and go to bed that night, maybe that is reward enough for being alive. And from that, we can start to cherish the simple existence of our lives. Like you were saying about the guy, your friend, who said everyone should spend some time in prison to really realize what we will lose if we lose everything. And we have to embrace the simple pleasures of life, and almost like an Epicurean kind of notion that, like, when we have we have a piece of fruit that, we eat a peach that tastes beautiful, we have to savor that moment. We have to do that in every aspect of our lives. It's like the psychologist Alan Maslow said, when people have these peak experiences, they can have a lot of problems in their lives and they have a very humdrum life. And then one day they look out the backyard and they see their children playing, and suddenly they're filled with this realization, yeah, that's it. That's what reality is. That's the peak experience. It doesn't matter I have lots of bills. It doesn't matter I'm feeling depressed. It doesn't matter that the world has gone nuts. I've just had this amazing transitory experience where I've seen my own children. I've seen the happiness in their faces, and it's brought incredible joy to me. And I've had this peak experience. And it's a shame that we actually have to have those experiences almost like as freak events. We should be trying to live those moments every day of our lives, take everything for granted, stop and smell the roses, and enjoy the richness of the freedom that we have, and embrace, instead of looking for the negativity all the time, although we should be cynical and aware of things that are being done to us, we should also cherish at the same time the incredible freedoms we have, both as individuals and both within this amazing planet we live in, and make the most of them. And you'll find that will take you places that you didn't know you could go to, because suddenly your consciousness has changed. You're literally, this is a very important thing that I have to get through to people. You're literally rewiring your brain with every thought you have. With every thought you have, positive or negative, there's a neurological cause and effect. It may even be changing your DNA through things like epigenetics. In fact, I know it is. There's a lot of science coming out now that you can change your genes by just your thoughts. And this is how we're controlled. We're controlled through fear and, superficial joy. If we can actually do that inside ourselves, in our own lives, and it's not as hard as people think it is, but by seeking these peak experiences, these peak moments of human existence, by understanding that if I go out tomorrow and I plant a bunch of onions and that I harvest them in 3 or 4 months, that's an amazing thing that I've just achieved. I didn't need a supermarket. I didn't need an expert. All I needed was my own intention, sunshine, water, and the ability to do it. If we can embrace every aspect of our lives in that way, we can completely change our own consciousness. And as a result, we will actually change the reality of the world around us, because we'll be able to experience reality in a whole new different way, because we're not trapped into endless negativity. We're not trapped into exterior control systems. We're trapped into the idea that we ourselves are capable of incredible things on our own, and from this we can change the reality going forward. I've absolutely no doubt it's to happen in my life. I've seen it done in other people's lives. It is totally possible. This is not a flaky new age idea. This is actual. You want to use the term hard science. You can change your reality because you change your brain by having certain thoughts, and when your brain is changed by these thoughts, you're able to tune into this reality in a different way. You can plug into different channels. You can plug into different experiences. And this is why fear is a very bad thing, because what they tell us is fear is really anxiety. It's a very different thing than the fear of being eaten by a predator. Because being eaten by a predator, if you're living in the wild, is a very real fear. That tunes our instincts and our way of our means of survival. Anxiety doesn't do anything like that. Anxiety makes us prisoners. It makes us prisoners of the now. And the now is not our now, it's the now of the control system. And that's why in 2013, this should be the beginning of the first year of people becoming sort of like consciousness insurgents, actually looking at themselves as being their consciousness and their thoughts as being a form of insurgency against the control system, ultimately based on finding solutions for yourself rather than aligning yourself with extraneous imposed forces. And that would be my way of dealing with it.
No, it makes an awful lot of sense too, because it comes down to, you are what you eat, you are what you think, you are whatever you're feeding yourself is what you turn into. So we really have to be very conscious as to what it is that we're feeding ourselves.
Yep, and food is everything. Energy is everything. It's thoughts, it's actual, chemicals from our foods, proteins, vitamins. It's things like sunshine. It's everything. It's all energy, and the energy is the quality of that energy is what really matters, not the quantity.
No, yeah, and the instant gratification is over. We have to get past that need to have everything right now, right away. 2 seconds before I even thought about it, it should not be in my hands. Things that are worth having actually do take work.
Oh yeah, and they take time, they take work, and it's an engaging process. You have to engage with it. It won't happen by itself. It won't happen by thinking about it. See, this is a problem with the New Age movement. They just have to think. They tell people you just have to think about things and they'll happen. Think happy thoughts, and imagine things. Bring forward your intention. No, intention and action work together. This is what the Vedic scriptures have told us. This is even what like Druidic cultures have told us. It's intention plus action. The two things are together. We exist. There's no escaping the fact that we exist in this material reality. Let's make the most of it, enjoy it. At the same time, too, let's try and program the underlying software to make that experience within this reality as meaningful and pleasurable for us as we can.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what we need to be doing. And it's easier said than done for some. There's a lot of baggage that you have to let go of, and you have to, like, the reprogramming is huge.
Well, you'll always be hit with the things in your life that you shouldn't have done. They don't go away, and they will hit you in very strange and very profound ways. The American painter Charles Burchfield, when he was dying in hospital, he said that all he could think about was the mouse that he killed when he was a little boy and the suffering of that mouse. And, so 70 years later, when he was a kid doing what stupid kids do, he killed a mouse. And, it came back to him on his deathbed, and he did not escape that. And that's because he had to clear out that baggage before the end. And a lot of us, we have to do that. We have to understand that we're not as perfect as we think we are, or we'd like to believe we are, and we certainly cannot be blaming every issue in our lives on other human beings. At some point, that's another thing that has to be brought up. It's very easy for people to blame others for the failings of all our own lives. Oh, I can't, the world is run by psychopaths, so I can't do anything. I'm a prisoner. That's a very handy excuse when you think about it. Or, all my relationships didn't work out, not because it's me that's the problem, but because all these people all these people are the problem. At some point, you have to turn around and say, well, is it me? Is there something about me that has caused this? And that's a painful thing, but very worthy, because that's the threshold moment. Because that's when you can cast off these things, that's when you'll actually be passing through the threshold into a new reality. And I absolutely believe in that, because I know it's true for a fact. It's almost like a form of confession. And that's another thing with these people who are waiting for an event in 2012. That you think you're going to be absolved of all your sins, of all your, all the things in your life that the ghosts of your past. It's not going to happen like that. You're going to have to confront these things yourself and deal with them directly.
Yeah, definitely. There is
And
no Mickey Mousing around any of this.
no, and as you said, it's difficult, but it's worth it. Nothing that's amazing comes easy. Nothing that's worthwhile can be got from a 1 hour store, or can be bought off the shelf. It's a path you have to. It's like Nietzsche always said. I've been reading a lot of Nietzsche recently, and the idea of, like, he had a horrible life. I mean, he was struck by syphilis most of his existence, but he never had any really happiness in his life. Very painful existence. But he realized that was worth it, because it made him cherish the little things in life that were amazing. And it made him, his whole life was basically a form of exorcism from himself. And that's it. That's something there's a lot to be said for that. The idea, he said that the best thing I could wish any of my friends is pain and suffering, because that will actually make them embrace what's worth living for.
I've made most of my greatest blossoming moments come out of every suffering I've ever had. I don't grow without. I don't think anybody grows without it. Even if you're digging your own hole, you have to climb out of it. It's the same thing. It's in falling that we learn how to get back up. It's incredible. You were talking about something about a virus being within humanity. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, and what your thoughts are as to, is that, do you mean that in a, like, metaphorical sense, or do you mean that in an actual physical sense?
Well, both really. There's the idea, my own work looking into the psychopathology and things like that. I came to the conclusion that whatever psychopathology is, it doesn't originate within this reality. It's in consciousness, and our neurology is the end process of a non-organic to organic chain. And if there is such a thing as duality in the universe, then there's male, female, black, white, positive, negative, up, down, all these dualistic concepts. then there has to be a kind of a pathological consciousness, and there has to be a benign consciousness. And we would like to think that human beings on a whole, we are the benign consciousness. And that's what we try to maintain. But there may also be a pathological consciousness that can actually sweep through whole societies and actually cause incredible suffering for human beings. If you look at like things like, you know, sectarian violence in places like India or in Europe against Jews or gypsies and things like that, it was ordinary people who were probably not violent doing the most horrific acts to men, women, and children, just unspeakable acts of cruelty. This was not what caused this. It couldn't have been the fact that they were just peer pressure. I mean, these people would often, you know, if you were to ask them, well, why did you do this? Why did you go into, you know, a town in India and kill, you know, a load of children who were Muslims because you were a Hindu? And they'll tell you, I don't know why. Everyone was just doing it. It just happened. And that's almost like the pathological virus when it affects a community, when it affects an organization, when it affects even a family or a group of people. It comes in and it causes madness. It causes people to do things that they would not normally do in their own lives. Most men, they could often be very decent people. This is why, you know, you have stories of like the, you know, the Holocaust and German officers and German, you know, people in the SS doing the most unspeakable acts, just shooting men, women, and children dead in the Ukraine, and then going home that night and playing with their own children. You know, what causes that? You know, okay, you could say there's cognitive dissonance, that they're actually in some kind of denial, although that's not what cognitive dissonance really means, that they're in some kind of denial. No, it's not that. There's something, they're infected. They're infected by a consciousness parasite that jumps into their heads. And I know this sounds far out there, but I do believe there's tremendous historical and anecdotal evidence to prove this. That if we don't have this firewall around ourselves to maintain our own humanity and decency, we can all, even the most wise of us, even the most caring of us, we can get caught up in this. This thing can jump into your head and pollute you. This thing can actually come in like a software program and have decent people in times of stress do appalling things and appalling acts.
Okay, now
Usually,
just a question, a little to present the other side. Is that not looking to blame something outside of yourself for your behavior, though?
yes, it is. Because, well, there's two ways of looking at it. You can blame, you can say, the devil made me do it, the old adage. But remember, the devil always knocks on the door and asks to be allowed in. It's up to you to let the devil in the door or not. So this is where we're back to the whole thing of self-responsibility. That if you see these pathological situations, these sort of like pathological firestorms appearing, say, in your workplace or in your town, you have the ability to just put the brakes on and stop and know what exactly is happening and pull the brakes off. Otherwise, you're guilty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you were whipped up in this stuff. You're still guilty. It doesn't matter if you can say it was, you know, because ultimately maybe there's a karmic kind of lesson to this. The idea that if you don't learn it in this life, then you'll learn it in the next one. That when these situations, when injustice comes about, and you see injustice happening, and you see people being victimized by gang mobbing or whatever, that you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to take part in this. I'm not going to do this. I don't care what this person did or what this group of people did or allegedly supposed to have done in my community. I am not going to take part in the mob mentality and burn people who very may well be innocent because they have a different value system than me or a different kind of a theocratic construct than me. And that's where the personal responsibility comes in. The point where you say, no, I am not going to do this. Almost like the idea of, you know, a conscientious objector within this situation. Again, that should be a part of waking up as well. Not buying into either superficial sort of like spiritual panaceas like 2012, but also not buying into pathological panaceas based on witch hunts and persecutions or attacking people. See, this is what the whole thing, like, I disagree with people who say we should kill all the psychopaths. I don't believe that for a minute. I think we should actually, have anything try to cure them. But most of all, just stay away from them. So don't get caught up in their mind games and their playing.
Well,
Should don't.
how do we go about curing them though? What is the cure for the psychopath? Because for the most part, and from our previous conversations, the only cure that I've seen is to like take every bit of energy away from them.
Yeah, well, that's your personal cure. That's your personal responsibility. But if people are psychopathic, and they can, as I said, I believe the psychopathic system, the individual, is a non-organic to organic chain, and they don't work certain parts of their brain, like the amygdala, like the parts of the limbic region and the frontal cortex. Not because they don't exist that these things are broken. You could put these things on any scanner, and you'll see that in a psychopath they're just as intact. You just take those brains out as they would be in a normal person. They're just not using it. You could probably force them, maybe by. MIT had a very kind of disturbing uh, research program last 2 years ago, but it would also, when you look at it in reverse, could be a positive research program where they actually discovered that they could shut off people's empathy by putting electromagnetic fields around the limbic regions of the brain. Which was the idea of this was to try and sell it to the military so they kill people without actually having any kind of scruples or morality, which is quite disturbing. But my way I'd look at this, they can actually alter the limbic regions to stop being empathic by switching off the amygdala. Maybe they can reverse the process in another way around. There's no reason why technology could be used as a sort of a way of stopping in the future a psychopath from committing their deeds, from to stop them from being impulsive. Remember, a lot of them are driven by adrenaline. They get a rush when they pull something, a fast one on someone. They get a rush of adrenaline. If you could actually stop that rush of adrenaline, they'd be less likely to have their predatory ways, even if they are psychopathic. So, I mean, I don't believe in this idea. See, we have to be very careful. We can't say, okay, we have 1 to 4% of the people of the world are psychopaths. Well, some of those psychopaths would not be violent. Many of them would not be violent, but some of them may not even be dangerous or be bad. They maybe just be existing within society, but they don't. They're not absolutely going out there and implementing their predatory ways. So if we can't have a situation where we turn them into a different race or a different ethnic group where we want to start persecuting them, rounding them up, shooting them, and put them in concentration camps. We went down that road with eugenics in the past. This is obsession with genetics and stuff like that can be very dark and very wicked and can unleash very toxic forces within people. The idea of like someone's genes damns them for life. My attitude is that when you're dealing with a psychopath in your own life, you get the hell away from them. But that's not going to make psychopaths go away forever. We've got to find a way to deal with them. If transhumanism was to actually mean anything, it would be to try and develop technology to stop people from walking into schools with guns and killing loads of kids, or things like that. Or stopping political leaders from getting into power who are psychopaths and like starting wars for oil and so on. So it's not. So we have to not emulate them. We have to learn how to treat them as a sort of a problem, a challenge within society that we can deal with. And maybe we even learn stuff from ourselves from these. So we're back to the whole idea of the pathological virus. When I think of things like the witch hunts in England in the 16th and 17th century, you had these witch finder, and in Germany too, you had these witch finder generals. They were all psychopaths. This guy who would go into a town and he would literally could accuse any woman of being a witch, or any man even, based on the most frivolous evidence. Now, you'd have the local psychopaths who may live next door to an old lady who has a couple of cats, and she would want that old lady's farm. So all you had to do was go to the local witch finder general and say, my next door neighbour is a witch. I saw her changing into a bat one night. Next thing you know, the poor old lady's pulled out. She's put through this impossible, sort of like typical psychopathic, crazy making idea where she can't, actually prove her innocence. And she's killed. The witch and a few others are killed in the town. And then the witch finder general leaves town, and the pathologicals and the psychopaths in the local area then get the farms and the homes of the people that they claimed were witches. This is why it's so dangerous. You will have other people then who would not be psychopathic, and they may be infected by this. See, what would happen then is you would have a witch hunt mentality where everyone would be afraid of them being accused of being a witch. So, so for the fear of them being afraid of being accused of being a witch, they will start pointing the fingers at anyone. in order to take the actual heat off themselves. And that's would be the point where this pathological virus would actually take over. The psychopaths on the ground, the handful of them, would whip up the phobias, whip up the fears, start accusing people on their own greed and their own specific needs, and the fear that would generate within the community, in terms of anyone being afraid of being called a witch or being accused of being a witch, it would explode like a wildfire.
And we're
It'd be,
here. We're here once again because now it's all of us speaking out our truth that are the witches.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Even the language that you see these sort of debunkers use for us, they even use kind of terms like that. Even the things of like, you cannot prove. Well, prove this. Well, I can't really because well, you don't have the evidence. Well, look in front of your own eyes. Does it make any sense that Lee Harvey Oswald's bullet literally turned around the corner in midair and hit JFK in the middle of the Dealey Plaza? Oh yeah, but there's no proof of it. We didn't have it. Does it make any sense that the Secret Service guys were called off by the Dallas police force before the shot was fired? Yeah, but that doesn't prove that it was a conspiracy. It's the same kind of thing as when they said to a witch, we'll drown you, and if you survive, you're a witch, and if you die, you'll go to heaven. It's the exact same.
It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm going to boil you in oil, and if you survive that, then you're a witch. And everybody died. And there was no regret. There's this new film out, well, not new-ish film out, called Paranorman. We watched with the kids the other night. And it was the idea that this young girl could speak to the dead people. And this was back in like early, say, 17th century. She was killed by all the townspeople because she was a threat to them. It was something that they feared. And anybody who has anything that makes them unique is something to be feared. This is something that they've been doing all along. The good point of the story, for a story that was a film that was, able to be purchased at something like Walmart, was that they actually showed children it's okay to be different. You're allowed to be different. You can be. But it's very confusing in this world when they tell you one thing like that in a film and you go to school and you have to do the group think.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's crazy making. That's, again, they give you two different versions of how to live your life, and you're caught up in the middle not knowing how to live which one. So you end up having to go to authority figures to tell you how to sort it all out. The oldest trick in the book. Tell you you're free, but put a chain around your neck. They do the same thing with your mind.
Yeah, did you happen to see that film Cloud Atlas?
No.
It's something I really recommend. They end up creating this species of humanoid that they have as servants basically to everybody, and they have a kill switch around their neck, and you get so many of these little shooting star prints, like a tattoo almost, and they're all Asian. It's very interesting. This is just one small part to the movie. And then after they get so many of these little shooting stars, they're sent, these beautiful girls are sent to be exalted, into exaltation, to be freed, and to become one of the consumers. You can't make this stuff up. But what's really happening is that they go behind that curtain and then they get killed. The bodies end up being fed to the other humanoids of this nature. And the whole process just keeps on going round and round and round and round. I really do. There's more to this than just that specific part of the film. I suggest everybody watches it. It is really incredible. There's some stuff in there that you could say, oh wow, there's an agenda being served in this. But I think that there's like a balance that was also given to us. It's like you're given a choice every single day. Do you choose to stay with the machine, or do you choose to walk away from it? I know myself, I'm very guilty of sticking to the machine. I'm weaning myself off. It's weaning yourself off.
Well, the idea is to use the machine, but not be in the machine. There's so many wonderful things that we can take, even in art and everything, and music. Even though a lot of culture, as you said, it's used to program us. That doesn't mean it all is. There's lots of good, there's many beautiful things in there as well. We have to learn how to be very discerning about these things. But you're absolutely right. They give us a choice at the same time. They say, Well, you can walk out that door anytime you want, but they make a situation where it makes it very difficult. But back to the analogy again of the battered wife, the husband can say she can leave anytime she wants, but where does she go? Where does she go? She has no way to survive without him. He'll probably have made a situation exist where she cannot survive independently of him, even though he abuses her. Well, that
Completely
happens to all of
ostracized.
us. Yeah, and that happens to all of us. And that happens to all of us. And then there's also elements of shame. Shame has been a great way to control human beings as well. The idea of being ashamed of being different, the idea of being embarrassed by, having your own way of living, the idea of like, they give these kids all these fairy tales like, all these fairy tales where they have these ideas of independence and like the emperor's new clothes and stuff like that. But don't you dare ever, try to do that in real life. They'll tell you that like pointing out the flaws of the control system in the emperor's new clothes is a noble and wonderful thing. But don't you dare try and do that in real life. It only exists within the fairy tale.
The first thing that they do, I remember it, well, just in my own upbringing and watching other people's bring up their children from, between the 70s till now, and it's still done, is don't point and don't speak out. Don't speak out against. Don't. It's none of your business. If it doesn't affect your life, walk away from it. But the grand illusion in that is that it all affects the all. And there is that grand consciousness where we're all connected, that, that little bit of New Age that I completely get. But I don't think that's New Age. I think that's ancient.
That's Jung's collective conscious.
Yes.
Yeah, Jung's collective unconscious is a real concept. There's no doubt about that. That's where I believe things like past lives are recalled. I don't think people actually come back from a different life. I just think they actually tap into someone else's consciousness that may have existed or exist at the same time. That's why I think. So, couples that have been together for years, they can actually even read each other's thoughts after a while. It's very common, and that's the same idea. Yeah, that does exist. That's not even New Age. That's always been there. That's as real as our own, biology. There's no doubt about that.
Well, it's our natural state of being, is to be able to tap into each other.
But when they tell children not to rock the boat within the social structure or within the system, that's taking place in the material world. It's not. It's serving an extraneous agenda. It's not serving the individual requirements of that child. I mean, I do understand that children have to be disciplined, to a certain extent. This is another thing that's often, it always annoyed me, especially when I used to be an atheist. It was one of the things that actually stopped me from being an atheist. I used to hear atheists say, well, I used to hear religious people say, well, if we didn't have religion, people wouldn't have any morality. And I used to find that so insulting, because that says more about you and the statement that you made, that you actually have to have a religious canon in order to have morals. These are innate. These are things that you should have by yourself. Human decency is something you don't have to learn from scripture. It's something that should exist already inside you. And I used to find that amazing that people would actually imply that we took away religion and religious scriptures and religious doctrine, that we'd have no morality and we'd have no sense of decency. I would argue it would be the other way around. We'd be more likely to be more decent and have a greater sense of empathy for others.
Well, it always bothered me when someone looks at me and says, well, I had a girlfriend once who said, I stopped today and I thought, what would Jesus do? And I couldn't help myself. I burst right out and I laughed. What do you mean, what would Jesus do? He's not here right now. What would you do that is going to be the right thing? What should you do that is the right thing? Why can't you come to that on your own? Why do you have to look to Jesus for that? I'm not slagging Jesus. It's the idea that people can't think for themselves, and you have that automatic natural instinct of what's right and wrong. You don't need to know what Jesus would do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at the internet, especially, I'm not putting down anyone, I'm not putting on Americans or anything, but for some reason, America is very different than other countries, that people really embrace the whole Christian thing and the whole biblical thing. But so many of the websites or the signatures of people or the comments are based on these kind of biblical scriptures that mean absolutely nothing in the real world. Do you really need this stuff? These things should be noetic feelings you have inside yourself. You don't need to validate it with some piece of text from a Bronze Age document that was written, by Semitic, peoples back thousands of years ago. That's not necessarily relevant to you today. And I find that kind of superficial sort of spiritual religion, a kind of superficial kind of thing that, like, what would Jesus do? Or quoting scripture, it doesn't impress me in any way. It says nothing about the person that you are. If you say to me, what would Jesus do? I'd burst out laughing as well. It's like Jesus. First of all, Jesus doesn't care what you do, and secondly, it's completely irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. This is a historical figure from 2,000 years ago who is not living your life. You're living your own life. And again, that's another aspect to it of how they control people.
Well, it
And
is. It's
again,
a control aspect.
yeah,
It's not taking responsibility for your thoughts and actions and laying them in somebody else's hands once again.
yeah, and especially a historical or a dead figure or someone who doesn't even exist, like a mythical figure. That's even more outrageous because you're not even putting it in the hand of a real human being. You're putting it in the hand of someone who doesn't even exist anymore.
And you're just feeding the ghosts. It's all feeding the ghosts instead of feeding what you've got going on now, which is
Mm.
something that we could make into something beautiful. And it comes right down to doing it on the individual level and making sure that you don't get sucked in by anything that isn't resonating with what you're doing.
Well, I would hope people would say instead of saying, "What would Jesus do?" say, "What does my intuition tell me to do?" And that's the secret. That's the key to unlock the possibilities and the real solutions. What does my intuition tell me? Because you'll always find your intuition is never wrong. It's always right. It always is right. I mean, at the time, you look back years later and you say, my first impression of that person, my first impression of that situation, I was absolutely right, but I suppressed it. I hid it. I buried it down to try and fit in with the gang or go with the flow. Your intuition never lets you down. And instead, so when people are really saying, "What would Jesus do?" What they're really doing is switching off their intuition.
Definitely, definitely. And not giving themselves the credit that they deserve to be able to come to a conclusion on their own without some kind of fear based propaganda that's toted over their head.
Yep, and the idea of some kind of divine punishment if they make the wrong decision.
Well, that's something that really taxes people, though. And that was part of the 2012 massacre that I saw as well. I say massacre of people's like spirit, because you would see that it almost fueled an anger to be even more adaptable to all of that, the revelations or whatever text is being followed, where we have to sit there and be afraid of some kind of damnation that's coming towards us.
Well, back to the Cathars again. If I was ever going to convert to a religion, they don't exist anymore. But one of the things they had made a lot of sense. They believed the idea of original sin was a horrific trick that was played upon human beings. That there was no such thing as original sin. That original sin was a ruse. It was a devious sleight of hand that was played upon humans by the devil, who they actually believed was the God of the Old Testament. Very interesting stuff. The Cathars used to believe that the God of the Old Testament was a psychopathic demon called Yahweh or Jehovah who was pretending to be God. Now, they did believe there was a God, and God created the universe. But what happened at some point, this psychopathic demon called Yahweh or Jehovah took over and started telling mankind that he really was God. And this is what they believed the Catholic Church was representing, that the Catholic Church actually represented the demonic aspects of religion, pretending to be Christianity, and they hid the true legacy of Jesus. And the true legacy, the Cathars saw Jesus not as a god, but as sort of like a kind of a radical revolutionary who came to earth and to tell people that you don't have to be believing this crap anymore of a religion of original sin, or believing that you're somehow responsible for sins or you're somehow a defective species because you're human and you have free will. And they killed them, and that's also why they killed all the Cathars as well. The Cathars, very interesting, their sect in that respect. And that's again the whole idea of original sin. How could a child who's been born have a sin on them that they're responsible for? It's purely one of the most evil things. No human being of any decency, in fact, I'd even go as far as saying that no human being could ever come up with such a concept that a human being from the moment it's born is damned, and its only way to salvation is to serve the system that can clean them, and they can be born again or saved, or they can be cleansed of original sin. It's a horrific thing. It's one of the most evil aspects the history of the world that's ever been foisted upon the human race. And that still exists today. This idea that human beings are somehow a problem. When you hear something horrible that happens in the world, like that shooting in Connecticut, you'll hear so many comments on the internet, like saying things like, "Oh, human beings, I hate being a human." Well, that's what happened there had nothing to do with you being a human being. We're constantly told to hate ourselves, dislike ourselves. We're pollutions on the planet. We're the cause of all the world's problems. But that's not you. You being a human being isn't the cause of these things in the world. In fact, I would say you being a human being is probably the solution. I actually, I'm not a religious or a spiritual person, but I do absolutely believe that there's something to this idea that if there is some kind of religion and there is something behind the main religions, particularly the big religions, perhaps it's something like that pathological virus that's pretending to be something it's not. In fact, you look at the history of, particularly of Christianity. I mean, it's just horrific. The Inquisition, the killing of indigenous people. How can they still sit there to this day and claim that they're God representatives on earth when they have this kind of history behind them? And the reason why they can do that is because it's psychopathic. It's a psychopathic notion that we can do whatever we want. We can kill as many people as we want, but the ends always justify the means. And how dare you question us because you've got original sin, and you have to be. You're not, so you're in no position to question my authority as a great religious leader. It's completely evil.
Oh no, definitely. And there's those people that have been programmed to completely and 100% blindly follow it. Um, what are the people on the outside of all that? This seems to be our greatest challenge, is the idea that we can only plant seeds. We can only take care of what's inside of ourselves, and then it'll move outward. A lot of us are coming to this idea that we get so frustrated and get lost inside of these little arguments with people like this. It really does become our duty almost to completely walk away from it, doesn't it?
And maybe it is our duty to walk away from it. I'm a great believer in that when something becomes toxic, or something becomes defective, or something becomes just bad for you, that you just leave it. I'm a firm believer in that, and I think that's probably a good way to deal with stuff. Now, it doesn't mean you forego your responsibilities. You give people the option or something, but you say to people like, are in a situation like I've been in jobs where it just got like very bad. There was bullying going on or something, and I just was very uncomfortable. Not necessarily towards me, but there may have been a bullying kind of system within the office, and I would just leave, and people would be amazed, like, and yeah, I'd get another job right away. It was almost like, stay and be defective, stay and be dysfunctional with the rest of us. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on. It's better to be, in the group with us suffering than off on your own finding new possibilities.
Yeah, stop
That's
complaining. Everybody else is doing it. What's so special about you that you have to make so many waves? I don't know how many times I've heard that.
Yeah, it's an awful statement, isn't it? It's like don't leave, stay in the prison with the rest of us, and I don't like that at all. I
Do you
think it's not.
remember? Do you remember being a child and your parents saying to you, I'm not sure, but I know myself and probably a lot of the listeners, if everybody was on a rooftop or the tallest bridge in the world and they decided to jump, would you follow them? And yet we're taught that we should do just that.
Oh yeah, the one I used to get was if I stuck my finger in the fire, would you? That was the one I got. And yeah, and that's the idea, is like, what? That's exactly what you're telling me to do. Again, the crazy making thing. The idea is like you're given this illusion of being independent, but you're given these kind of these trappings and these almost like warnings. They're almost like mandates or edicts that are telling you, don't you dare try.
It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. It's like there was an Abraham Hicks about the law of attraction, the idea that, if your grandmother puts your hand on the burner and then your mother puts her hand on the burner, and then you go to, why would you do that? You know it's going to burn. Do you put your hand on the burner anyway? Nine times out of 10, most of us do. We put our hand on the burner. We know it's going to burn. We see the suffering that it imposes and we do it anyway.
Yeah, well, you see that in in the smoking thing, I don't smoke, but like I've never actually smoked. But people who smoke cigarettes, and all my life it's always been smoking gives you cancer, smoking is bad, smoke, and it's almost like they created this sort of like mystique of the forbidden fruit of nicotine in order to get teenagers addicted to it. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's almost
Definitely.
like, is that another part of it? Is that another aspect of it? Is it in, they get like the forbidden fruit thing is very deeply programmed into people. So the idea,
Seduction.
exactly. So the only outlet to express your individuality is doing things that your parents or your school teachers tell you not to do. Once they're not too radical, there are enough, and there's enough of your friends doing it. You will join in and do it. And that, I'm convinced. I'm convinced and believe that the cigarette whole thing, the whole cigarette industry, is based on the idea of making it a taboo in order to get young people to do it.
See, it confuses me because I mean, I don't know if you've looked into like the history of, say, cigarettes, but Ronald Reagan used to do commercials, and things were said like, "Oh, I'm sending them to all my friends this Christmas season, and because I want them to have the full body flavor with no yucky aftertaste." Are you kidding me? So it used to be. I'm confused because it used to be right out in the open that it was completely acceptable to do. Yes, and now they've turned it into a crazy taboo that says that we shouldn't be doing it to get people to do. I don't understand what's gone on in humanity in the last 75 years or whatever the case may be that has made it from here, let's put it right in your face and then take it away from you.
Yeah, it's almost like there was a constant training of us. That they know there's things about us that we have this. It's probably part of our impulsiveness to explore, to go look, and we all want to see if there's a secret there, if there's something, if I'm missing out on something magical here, or something really interesting. So what they do is they make it seem like a taboo, but it's not a completely horrific or dark or you know really, really awful taboo. It's just a bit of a taboo that's somehow, so it's like underage drinking. It's somehow acceptable, but it's still a taboo. It's still dangerous, and you're living on the edge if you cross over that. And that's how that's another aspect of how they control us. Because if you're focused on those kinds of superficial taboo breakings, you'll never transcend or break the big taboos of actually walking away from society and say, look, I've had enough of this crap. I'm going to find a new way to live. So that what they do is they keep us trapped within sort of minor taboos, smoking, underage drinking, doing things like that. Couples going to a hotel room with 50 Shades of Grey, having a little bit of fun. That's the little taboo, the little bit of titillation, the excitement, and that's what controls us and stops us from actually saying, I want to get out beyond this and actually start exploring the world as it really is. So that it's very clever. They're very devious. They know exactly how we work, but they give us these little bit of temptations that they can sell us stuff, rather than actually have us like look at our own lives and do the big thing on our own.
It's incredible. It's incredible how deep it goes. It's incredible how difficult it is to escape from absolutely all of it as well. Because I mean, I use myself as an example only because it's the only one that I have that I know full and well. We've been walking away for 4 years now, 4 or 5 years now. We've been walking away slowly, little by little. It starts with the smallest things like throwing away your microwave, and then it ends up being taking your kids out of school, and then stopping the reliance of clocks and not paying attention to calendars as much. Like, we're really going far with this. Changing the food that we eat. We're still really bad. There's those things that we sneak every so once in a while because, oh, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't have a good enough answer for it. But
Well,
go ahead.
there's nothing wrong with sneaking those foods now in a while. There's nothing wrong with that. Once it's not once you know what you're doing and you know that this is just a sort of a temporary spasm rather than a new going back to the old system.
Yeah, it's not the
Once you're
norm
aware of that,
anymore.
it's fine. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Life is to be enjoyed, even the things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a few beers and having a laugh with your pals now and again. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
It's great.
no.
Actually.
Definitely
Yeah,
not. And that's the thing I think we get very hard. And just to talk to it from my perspective, I took it too far this year and I hurt myself because we do. We hurt ourselves because, I mean, coming out of Babylon, coming out of the Matrix, coming out of this reality and trying to break yourself away from it, there you suffer moments of, oh, I don't know how to put it into any technical or medical term, but you suffer moments of complete delusional, I want to say fantasy about what your beliefs are to some extent. And you do sometimes go down that path of fanaticism. It's very difficult. It's very easy. It's very easy to let it happen. It's the ability to be able to reel yourself back in from
well,
that delusional thing.
they want us to fly off on extremes on either end. They want that. They want us to, not be stuck in common sense. It's the double thing. They say be sensible, be responsible. But if you see how advertising and marketing and television works, everything is about having you behaving almost like a child, the adult child, the child that never grows up. The idea of you were constantly flying to these oh my god moments. Oh my god, what am I doing? Oh, if I have to become a vegan, I have to become a full on vegan. If I have to do this, I have to become a full on. If I have to stop drinking, I have to go completely cold turkey. I can't even have it. This is ridiculous. This is how they control us again. They have us flying between extremes where we never sit down and process the information. But like I said, the middle ground is where the answer lies. I have a new book out at the moment called The Anvil of the Psyche, and I have a whole thing on how to actually process information as it's handed to us. And I drew a graph that came up with this a while ago, and it just shows you how it's between two extremes, the media and the system flies. They want you constantly flying. When you hear information for the first time that may be new, it's that, oh my God moment. And then, you plummet down to the other end. The whole idea of like we're constantly thrown to extremes, extreme high, extreme low, happiness, extreme joy. The whole thing is always, if we lived like that in the wild, we'd be eaten by wild animals in a moment because we would not be able to process our responses to external stimuli. Because in our natural state, we are in the middle and we should be able to process this information as it comes to us in a neutral sense, so we find the middle path, the middle ground in all this hype and hysteria, because they use this hype and hysteria to control us. Because if we're flying between extremes of like mass media induced, again we're back to the whole thing of what they did during the witch hunt times, where they'd have people fly between extremes of terror and relief. If you could find a way you can find in your own personal life a way to process information as it comes to you in the middle ground in a neutral manner where you can actually critically evaluate it as it happens rather than going with the flow or flying along with the mass hysteria, you will actually find that will serve you very, very well in life. But because they're so devoted to having us find gurus and life coaches and all this other stuff, to like people like Oprah and Dr. Phil to actually tell us how to live when we should have these things naturally. We're constantly thrown between experiences, thrown between extremes, and we never learn how to fully sit down, relax, and process that information as it comes to us in a very cognitive and a very balanced manner. And that's another way they control us. I would say that's a very important one for people to go forward. A very important one for people now on, I would say, would be to actually, as the information is presented to you, instead of just flying off the rails, up or down, negative, positive, or following the hype, like something like the next Occupy movement or whatever they give us, just sit back and say, okay, is this really all it's made out to be? Is this really the panacea to the problems of my life? Is this really a horrific experience for me that the economy has completely crashed? No. You will understand that if you stay in the middle and you process this information between the two extremes, evaluating as it goes along, you will not have these hormonal fluctuations of dopamine and serotonin flying all over your head, causing you confusion. You'll be able to sit and have a wisdom about you. This is why, well, as you age, you do get wiser. There's no doubt about that. That's why, in indigenous societies, they have council of elders, people who are long past their peak years. They're not controlled by hormones anymore. They're probably postmenopausal, and they can sit there and they can process information, make decisions, and actually guide people towards wisdom without any kind of sensationalism. So that would be a great one for people to practice going forward in 2013. Turn away from hype and sensationalism and learn how to process external stimuli in a new cognitive and critical manner. And you'll find that your life will be so much richer for it, because you'll be far less agitated and more relaxed. And you'll also feel a sense of independence that you have escaped the machine.
This is incredibly important because I don't know how you're getting the news in, where you are in Ireland, but okay. So have you seen what's going on with Idle No More?
No, what's that?
Okay, now what's happened is our Prime Minister sold off our tar sands and all of our fresh water. I think there are hundreds of thousands of lakes down to like, I want to say 100, and I'm probably being generous. Now what's happened is an indigenous chief has decided that she's going to starve herself and go on a hunger strike until Harper, our Prime Minister, decides to, or the Prime Minister of the de facto government that is Canada, until he meets with them to talk about Indigenous rights and whatnot. And there's been this outcry all over the world, and I understand, I comprehend why everybody's doing it, but at the same time I see madness, absolute chaos and madness. And I used to be one of those people that would jump right into any Indigenous cause 100%, but I really appreciated what you just said, because I have been sitting directly in the middle of this one and not getting involved. I was going to go to the march that was going on New Year's Eve. I decided not to. It wasn't even that I decided not to. It was like my whole day went in this way that was veering me off of the path to go in the first place. I just wasn't meant. We weren't meant to be there, so we didn't fight it and we didn't, push to go there. It just seems that I am taking that middle path now because I don't want to just jump in full and well. I want to see everything. And because I've been able to do that, I've been getting information coming to me from both sides of it, and I can process it on my own instead of being full on in the protest, or like other Canadians and people in the world saying, well, look at what the Indigenous have been given, because those people saying things like this don't understand how we got to this point in the first place.
Well, I'm very glad for you to hear that. Not to, make light of this woman's hunger strike or this issue, but if there's one message you and I can actually give to listeners of this program that they could actually think about in their own lives, is that issue of learning to engage with hype and sensationalism, with that kind of like, oh my God, I'm so angry, this kind of to fire you up, this kind of like this constant need that they impose upon us to have us join the causes without even thinking about it. Going forward, learning how to modulate, regulate, and balance our responses to such issues. This is true wisdom. This is what allows you to develop your intuitive and your intuition so powerfully, because you're taking control. You're almost becoming your own council of elders within inside yourself. So I'm very happy to hear you say that, for the reasons that I'm talking about it, is that you've actually learned. This is wisdom, this is growth, this is maturity. So that's, in this post-2012 hype stage, what do we learn? We learn how to engage with hype and hysteria by regulating our response towards it. And that would be my ultimate message in getting out of prisoner cinema during this talk. Maturity.
Go ahead.
Maturity, measured responses, and the ability to process information according to your individual cognitive understanding of it, and not the hype behind it.
There's a song by a group called Medicine for the People, and in it Nako says something that is incredibly the only way you're going to survive is to find the guide inside. That's the only way we're going to survive this madness that we see before us, is the ability to go within and discern within. There is nothing without that's going to do that for us. I mean, as much as I was appreciative of what Thomas just shared with me and was able to relate it to my life and say, hey, I was able to do that. And he gave me praise. I wasn't relying on it. I was just happy I got it. And that's what more of us need to do, is just, we're talking about it, discussing it, not pushing anything, coming to our own conclusions, being able to share with each other. These are all incredibly important things that we need to be doing, and not taking stock in the petting that we get from others because we're not needing it.
Yep, I can't add anything more to that. That lyric you said is spot on. That's how it is. That's the future. If you want to survive going forward, that's the future. That's how to think of things. That's how to process things. Maturity. There's a lot to be said for that phrase. It's a very, very it's not just age, but it's maturity of emotions, maturity of intellect, maturity of insight and intuition, and that will serve you very, very well, because you will not be caught up in these hypes that will lead you towards disappointment, despondency, and a sense of self-annihilation, that you have no control in this world. If you can switch off the TV, I don't even have a TV, but say you're watching something like Fox News, and there's someone like, what's his name, Hannity, screaming and shouting about some issue, and it's getting you upset. You pick up that remote control, or better still, you walk over to that TV and you pull that plug out of the wall. Guess what? He doesn't exist. The hype and sensationalism doesn't exist. And you're no longer having this external stimuli, this external extraneous agent affecting your hormones and your neurological chemicals, actually causing change in your brain that could be very damaging to you and your quality of life. You have switched him off. He's gone. And if we can do that with so many things, it's not being like, I'm not talking about being like a hermit. It's nothing like that. We're still living in the world, but anything that we can't control, an external issue, it's hard enough having to try and take care of your own life without having to try and save the world. That's why I can't understand people like Bono when he wants to like save the whole world and stuff like that. Why does he want to do that? He's just creating stress for himself. Being in a rock and roll band, being super rich, and he has a happy family and everything like that. Why isn't that enough for him? Well, that's a burden I don't think anyone needs. So again, we're back to the idea of like the hero worship. We're also putting others in charge of our own existence. Again, we don't have to engage with this stuff. We understand it, we empathize. If we see something, a terrible injustice in the world on the TV, yes, it's sad. Yes, it upsets us. But constantly watching it replayed over and over again on the news channels, constantly hearing people debating about it, constantly hearing one side from the truth movement screaming and shouting one thing, and one side from the mainstream screaming and shouting another thing, it does not do anything for you personally in your own life. You're sitting there, you're literally being bombarded with two forces that are not serving you personally. And instead of flying between one side and saying, I hate the mainstream, I love the alternative, and then flying what they tell you and then shooting back the other side, the best way is just to sit back, process both sides and say, look, I have my own feelings about this. Yes, it's horrible what happened. Yes, what happened on the other side of the world is a terrible thing, but I can't do anything about it. And then you just get on with your life rather than spending your time on the internet making videos about it, having arguments with people on message boards about it, trying to prove that you're on one side or the other by posting memes to Facebook about it or Twittering about it. You just say, this is what it is. I feel this way about it, but not passionately enough for me to get involved in it. Because ultimately, I cannot go travel those 5,000 miles to this other country and change it. I can't do that. But I can only change what's in my own life and what's right here.
Yeah, and creating profound change within yourself, it just ends up expanding outside of yourself. There are things that you can do that will ripple effect, change things on the outside, but that's not what we should be concentrating on. And the idea, like we were saying earlier, the idea of having to prove your point and everybody else is wrong is not necessary anymore either. Just concentrate on what we can come together on.
Oh yeah, like people will even say to me, like I never see you complaining about anything in politics or anything. You're always like, just getting on with your life. Why is that? And I say, I don't have a TV. I don't pay attention. It's just that simple, you know. So by not watching the evening news, I'm not affected by it.
That's right.
Simple as
That's
simple as
exactly
that.
it. Yeah. And well, there's always going to be those people that are going to inform and that are going to be doing what they're doing. And something that I discussed with Jason Gregory as well is that non-attachment is huge. Don't be attached to anything that you're putting your energy into. Don't have that attachment, because once you do, then you become possessive over it and you feel the need to protect it.
Well, I know a lot of people think he's kind of silly, but I actually am a big fan of his work, and he did a lot to wake me up in a kind of a spiritual way. Was Deepak Chopra, and he had the law of intention being the idea of that was to, if you wanted something, if you believed in something, yes, you work towards it, but you don't attach yourself to the outcome, because you ultimately realize that it's the journey along the way that's the real reward rather than the outcome. And that's what really, I think, that was a very, in the seven spiritual laws of success, that was something that resonated with me very strongly nearly 20 years ago. And I still hold to that today, that he was absolutely right. The law of detachment says that you can actually believe in something, but you do not hold on to the outcome. So, like, you put this in terms of the 2012 thing. Yes, we all want a better world. Yes, we all want a better society. We want a more sort of relaxed, spiritual, empathic, and kind civilization, if you want to use that term. But pinning it on a date in December 2012 is attachment to the outcome. And when that doesn't happen on that date, it becomes disappointment. But you forget along the way, you were probably having a lot of very positive thoughts about the future, but they were all robbed from you because nothing happened. So it's very important not to become too attached to things, to understand that they're transitory targets, but they're not absolute objectives.
This has been fantastic. For the listeners, you've been listening to Lifting the Veil with Carrie Lee, and we've been talking with Thomas Sheridan for the last 2 hours. Um, Something that I want you to cover is just let the good listeners know where to find you, what you're working on next, and what's to come.
Well, my website is thomassheridanarts.com. And at the moment, I've just finished a book called The Anvil of the Psyche, which is basically fleshing out everything we spoke about here today. In fact, I'm holding the graph in front that tells you how to deal with, response to external stimuli. And that's going on worldwide. I haven't done the distribution yet, but it'll be distributed on all the, all the online booksellers in the next month or so. That's the next thing. For 2013, I'm going to try and sort of like become almost like a hermit. I noticed. I don't mean I'm hiding away or anything like that, but I want to. I want to. I want to go in. I want to explore myself internally and try to understand uh, things that I've. The last 2 years have been an enormous adventure. I was a nobody 2 years ago. I'm kind of fairly well known now. I've had tremendous opportunities. I've spoken to, gone traveled to other countries and spoke to people there, and had amazing advantages. And I meet people like yourself and all kinds of amazing people, and that's been great. But I've neglected my own personal spiritual growth, so I want to spend some time, basically, you know, charting out a roadmap of me, and that's something that I was thinking about there as the 2012 thing was happening, and it's something I want to work on. So, again, I'll take each day as it comes, but I think for the next while it'll be a time of reflection, and just like we said, instead of moving between extremes, I'll be trying to live a life that will be sort of more kind of meditative, and I think I'm quite looking forward to it.
I'm really glad that you said that, because it's the idea of not being the hypocrite. Not that you are or that I am, but we all tend to be to some extent. We have the answers. How many times I've spoken certain words on shows and not taken my own advice, and it's just time to do that. it's fully time to go within, and you're completely in step with everything that I've been feeling as well. Is it's just time to do that deep inner spiritual work so that we can be the best us that we can possibly be.
Yeah, well, we've done all the research, we've done all the looking, we've read all the books, we've watched all the videos, and now it's time to actually, explore ourselves. And I think that would be a very healthy thing for all of us to do going forward, is to actually say, who am I? What's my purpose in this life? And how can I use it to best serve humanity while living an experience at the moment that I can find fulfilling and rewarding? And that's it. So when you think about that, it's really not too hard. When you look at it in that way, it's not too difficult. And it's something to look forward to that's real, that's tangible, and ultimately all of us as individuals have our own control over. What more do you want in life?
Absolutely nothing. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show again. And when you come out of your cocoon of deep inner discovery, make sure that you come talk with us again, because I'm looking forward to the creativity that comes from your search.
Well, I'll be honored to do that. And good luck to you on your journey, and good luck to all your listeners on their journeys too, because, here we go. We all have to take that first step of the 1,000 miles, and it's well worth trying, and it's something that we could all enjoy doing. And ultimately, when we find ourselves, or we may never find ourselves, but ultimately when we come back from that journey, we'll have lots of adventures to share with each other. And so that's something to look forward to.
Definitely. Thank you so much again for coming onto the show, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always. These are the way the shows are going to be going from now on, pre-recorded and then delivered to you in a beautiful package of Justin's editing. And we really do hope that you enjoy that. Until next time, peace, love, and yeah, hey, why not a hemp lollipop? Have a great day. Ciao.